My name's Thomas A. Hendricks. I live in Lansing, Michigan. I hunt 42 acres north of Fowler, Michigan. Of the 42 acres that I hunt, a third of it is swampland where the does, fawns, and the bucks bed down during the course of the day. On November 16th, there was snow on the ground. I was hunting out of an elevated hut overlooking a narrow 80-foot long, 80-yard long food plot that was very narrow. I'm trying to intercept the deer in the morning as they come from the south from the farmers' crops. There's quite a bit of activity during the course of the day. As the afternoon came on, I started seeing more smaller bucks come into the food plot, checking the does out. As the sun started setting, I used a doe bleat, and I was doing the call about every 5 minutes. And as I do that, I'm checking my shooting lanes. As the sunset started to go down, I got into my backpack and started loading up a little bit, and I had put my shotgun in the corner. As I raised my head, I looked out the northwest window of one of my shooting lanes, and in the shadows, this big-bodied deer stood. That's what really caught my eye. So I got my 1187 Remington up in the window, and just as I got my crosshairs on him, he took a step to the left, what made him broadside, and 80-yard double lung shot sent him crashing into the honeysuckle bushes. As I got down from my elevated hut, walked over, it's now dark out, and with flashlight in hand, I go over to where this, I call him Mr. Big, stood, and there was no blood or no hair. So I started doing the small circles. Pretty soon I got onto a blood trail. I started following that. When I got to the end of it, I realized that this was the blood trail of the doe that I had harvested earlier in the morning. So I walked back to where the buck stood and went in a northerly direction to one of my mowed trails that runs east and west. And on the north side, I found a speck of blood about the size of your little fingernail on an oak leaf. I walked 15 yards into the brush, and there he laid, all hung up in a honeysuckle bush. So I took my drag line, put it around his neck and front legs to pull him out to the mowed trail so I could hook him up to my quad. That's when I realized how big he was, because I could only move him about a foot at a time. I load him up on my bumper buddy and take him over to my good friend Bruce Silman, who processes deer, with his son Carson. When I got there to the shop, Carson put the overhead door up, and he usually pulls the buck off the bumper buddy into the shop. And after one hard pull, he realized that he needed some help. So we get him into the shop, put him on the hoist, and we always weigh our deer before we dress them out. And Mr. Big dressed out, or weighed live weight at 224 pounds. When we got the hide off, we noticed that there was 2 pus pockets on both sides above the upper stomach and between the spine. And we said, well, he must have got shot during archery season. Fast forward to December 17th, Fowler Conservation Club had a big buck night where you could bring your bucks in, and they had a raffle and everybody could walk around and check everybody's deer out. As my wife Patty and I sat across the aisle from these antlers, we would sit there and watch the reaction of what people thought when they saw this rack. A few minutes later, a young man, who I learned the name of Trevor, came over and sat down, and he had told me 2 days previous of me harvesting this buck that he had shot an arrow at him and ricocheted off a limb, giving him a bad area where the arrow went. He tracked it for at least 2 hours in the snow and never found him. So 2 days later, Mr. Big comes into my scope, and with a nice shot, we put him down. After looking at my trail cam pictures in 2018, I had a big 8-point that I had 2 pictures of, and because the shape of the route tines, I realized that the 8-point had turned into a 10-point. There was one other farmer that had pictures of this buck on his trail cams also.